I know a lot of you watching have questions about what church you should go to around LGBTQ questions. Like maybe you're queer yourself or a family member is, or you just really care about this. So I want to talk to you a little bit about my experiences and like how you can find a church that will be good for you, or at least give it your best shot, because sometimes it can be really difficult. And there's a couple things making it difficult. First of all, a lot of churches are not super clear about what their position is because they don't want to like lose people. Like maybe they're not totally accepting and affirming, but they don't want to come across that way, or they, really genuinely do care for queer people and they think they should be able to love the sinner, hate the sin, but like maybe that doesn't work for you, like it doesn't work for me. And the other thing that makes it hard is that if you're coming out of a more conservative tradition, you might find it really difficult to find a church that actually feels right for you and kind of meets your need in that respect. So we're going to talk about what steps you can take to find a church, and maybe some ideas of what denominations and what places you might look for to find a church that maybe suits you a little bit better. So let's get into it. First, I'm going to broadly define churches in 3 ways. One is a church that is rejecting. So these are churches that do not even think it's okay to be LGBTQ. These are the kinds of churches that preach sermons that really just use negative stereotypes and say, your identity is in Christ and you shouldn't identify with your sin, and so you can't even say that you're gay or that you're trans or whatever the case may be. So those churches I'm going to define as rejecting, and I frankly would not recommend any LGBTQ person to ever to go to a church like that. That's just not probably going to be the place for you. The second kind of church is a church that is not rejecting, but is also not affirming. I'm going to call this, and a lot of people call this, an accepting church. So this would be a church that says, I accept you as an LGBT person, but they probably also have an asterisk there that they don't accept if you have a partner or if you want to get married. They don't accept your same-sex relationships. If you want to transition gender, they're probably not going to accept you. You could have issues doing things like having your child dedicated or baptized. You're going to run into some difficulties if you want to live the way most LGBTQ people live. But they're not going to be like, you can't say that you're gay. They're not going to preach stereotypes from the pulpit. It's going to have a bit of a different feel. They're going to be a little bit more educated and a little bit more careful about the things that they say. So these are accepting churches that are not affirming. And of course, the third type of church is an affirming church. So an affirming church is one where there's really not a difference between LGBTQ members and straight cisgender members in terms of how you can participate in church. They do the marriages, you're welcome in the pulpits, and the staff. It's just like they're 100% affirming of same-sex marriages, of transgender identity. They're totally on board and even celebratory. So which kind of church is right for you? I am going to suggest, again, don't go to a rejecting church. If they're stigmatizing LGBTQ people, it is not going to end well for you. I do know people who go to churches that are accepting but not affirming. I have known people who have gone to churches that have been kind of on a journey from being accepting to being affirming and have helped them with that journey. That does happen, but that is a rare story. So I would say you need to think about your own mental health, what other stressors you have in this area, and what you can and can't accomplish in a church like that. I've known a lot of people who have gone to accepting churches and simply had to leave because eventually they just realized that they were not accepted in the same way that everybody else was accepted. So I would say an affirming church, hands down, is going to be a good decision. You're not going to have a problem, being yourself fully, or having your family members being yourself fully, or fully expressing yourself as an ally. If you are an ally, you might be a little bit more open to going to an accepting church that's not affirming, and also like kind of actively moving the ball, like doing some Bible studies or talking to some people or putting having some conversations around that. But if you're queer yourself, I just think you should go to an affirming church. I do this work like you see me doing in this video. I wrote a book. I talk to conservative pastors all the time about being more affirming. And sometimes those conversations and those interactions can be extremely difficult for me. And so I made the choice early on, and I am so glad I did, that I would not accept anything less than an affirming church. It was very difficult for me because my tradition is very unique, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and I really miss so much of it. I miss the experience of the Sabbath that we had. I miss so much about the culture. I really miss it. But at the same time, I just know that I can't be myself there. I can't participate in church the way the Apostle Paul talks about church, where everybody is part of the same body and they're working together and they're using their gifts in order to build one another up and build up the church. I just can't do that at a church that's accepting and not affirming, because they're not going to let me use all my gifts. So I can't really, in a biblical way, even be part of the church. So for me, that's why I've decided to go to an affirming church. And when I first started going to an affirming church, the pastor of the church was a gay man, and I just cried, I think, every single week to be able to bring the wholeness of who I was to a church service and be not only accepted, but not even to stand out, to just be part of the community. And the support that I've experienced, it's really been very important for me. So that's my story. Yours might be different as you think about these issues. So how do you find out what a church is actually like? Well, if you have a church you might be interested in, obviously the first step is to go to their website, look for a statement. If they have a clear statement that clearly says that they fully accept and affirm LGBTQ people, that they do weddings, that all of those things, or if they have staff that you can see that is openly queer, that's probably a good place for you to go. The other thing you can do is go through the sermons and look through if they have posted sermons online or blog articles, and just search. You can even just do a Google search, and you can search, site : and put in the site of the church, and then just put the word LGBTQ or gay or homosexual and see what comes up, to see what their teaching has been in the past. And that'll give you a pretty good idea if something comes up. But sometimes nothing comes up. So what you want to do in that case, probably if it is a church you're really interested in and you think it might be what you're looking for, then reach out to someone at the church. And you're going to want to have certain types of questions ready to go. Now I get to talk to you about an organization I absolutely love, Seventh-day Adventist Kinship International. They're especially focused on Adventists, people of Adventist heritage, or who are connected to Adventists and who are either allies or LGBTQ people themselves. They're an affirming organization, and they have meant the world to me. When I was first coming out, it was a really difficult time, and they were absolutely there for me. People from the organization talked to me. I'm a member, which gives me access to all kinds of social media groups. I watch their YouTube channels, the resources on their website. It's a fantastic organization. I suggest you check them out. Link in the show notes. So the problem is that a lot of churches, and I have encountered this, will use language to say, everyone is welcome here. We welcome you. We celebrate you. I would help everybody would be welcomed here and affirmed for who they are. We love everybody here. And they'll use that kind of language, and they will make it sound, if you're not kind of familiar with this, like they're affirming, but they're actually accepting but not affirming, and you're going to run into some barriers in that church pretty quickly. I'm just going to give you an example. There was somebody on Facebook who was making lots of kind of idealistic posts about his church and how open they were for everybody and all of this. But I knew actually what their church was like, so I started a private message with this guy. I asked him to put himself in the shoes of an LGBT person, and if your marriage wasn't accepted at the church, would you feel accepted at the church? If your church required you to get divorced, or if you couldn't preach because of your marriage, would you feel accepted? And the guy just would not even engage in the question or entertain the question. He just kept saying, I would hope anyone will be welcome at my church. And then I happened to run into him later and he pretended like he didn't know me, which is really funny. So like, be careful. Sometimes the language is out there and it seems like really open, but it might not be. So you need to actually ask the nitty-gritty specific questions, especially if you're an ally. Pay attention to this because they will love to. There are some churches, not all, that will love to pull the wool over your eyes and make you feel like they're very welcoming and very affirming, and they're just not. So So the questions you really need to ask to get down to the nitty-gritty is, do you do same-sex weddings at your church? Do you hire, or are you open to hiring pastoral staff that is LGBTQ, who are in a same-sex relationship or who have transitioned genders or who are non-binary? Are you willing to do those things? Ask those specific questions, and if they do not give you a direct answer to those questions, the answer is probably no. Now, there are some churches I know about that are doing their 100% best to be affirming, but they're not 100% of the way there because there are restrictions placed on them by the denomination. So they would love to be able to hire staff that's LGBTQ, but they kind of have limitations in how much they can do that. A church like that is going to come out and directly tell you, because they're trying to create change within their denomination, and they understand and they recognize, they really get it what your experience is. So they'll come out and they'll tell you directly what the barriers are in their church. They'll say, unfortunately, we're not able to have wedding ceremonies in our church for same-sex couples. We wish that we could. We do offer this other thing. They'll have something that they can offer. You might find a church like that within, if it's a denomination you're really interested in going to, that could be actually a really good option for you, because those are people who are allies and who do care, and they're pressing against some limitations that are there for their denomination, but they want to change it. So don't write churches like that off, but do ask those very specific questions. And people who are unwilling to answer those questions, this is important. People who are unwilling to answer those questions, they don't have your best interest in mind in holding back. They're probably more interested in the reputation of their church than they are in really being honest with you and making sure that you are protected from harm. So if they won't answer those questions directly, I would steer clear. And if somebody says they want to meet you for coffee and talk to you about it, like, you can do that if you want to, but they also should be able to answer those questions directly in an email. And if they can't, then the answer is probably going to be no. Let's talk a little bit about denominations. I would encourage you, be open to discovering new things and learning to love new things. Just be open to it, be curious, learn about new churches. So I am from a denomination that has, like, they would call low church, like more kind of a casual approach to the worship service. But some churches they would call like high church, and that are more liturgical, kind of have more ceremony and follow like the liturgical calendar, which these churches have a lot to offer. I think that liturgy is really fascinating and interesting, and it's been integrated into some of the churches I've gone to since coming out in really great ways. So you could find yourself really learning about some really new and interesting and different things along the process. It's not all going to be for you, but that's okay. Don't try to find the perfect church. Try to find a church that can be healing and that can help you to get the things that you need. You're going to find differences in different denominations. So I would not say that every church you go to in a specific denomination is necessarily going to be liturgical or high church or low church, but this is just some general ideas. Episcopalian churches are affirming, and those ones actually are pretty liturgical in their style. So those would be a good one to check out, especially if you have a background in Catholicism. You might feel much more comfortable in Episcopalian church. Their approach to gender and sexuality are both very, very progressive. So you might also be interested in like PCUSA churches. That's a Presbyterian denomination that is more affirming. They've had a lot of splits in the Presbyterian churches. So kind of do your research and find if you're interested in something that could be on the more liturgical side, Presbyterian could be a really good way to go. I also have to mention the Metropolitan Community Church because this was the first church to ever be affirming. It was started, I believe, in the 60s, like during gay liberation, and it was started by queer people. So it used to be like the only option. Rich history with the MCC denomination. If you have one in your area, they're definitely worth checking out. Another one that's been affirming for a very long time is the Christian Church, sometimes called Disciples. So they are definitely way more on the progressive side in lots of ways. They might feel a little bit different if you've come from a more conservative church. Their approach to scripture and inspiration is probably going to be different. The same is true of UCC Church. I went to a UCC church for a while after coming out. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. But I also just decided I was going to accept the parts that were different and take what I needed. And what I really needed was a safe space where I could be loved. And I definitely got that. Also, I think a really good option for you if you are looking for something that has a more kind of a biblical feel to it, that really is more reminiscent of the churches you grew up in. If you grew up in a more traditional church, maybe Southern Baptist or maybe something like that, I would check out, or even non-denominational, I would check out the UMC Church, United Methodist Church. They've just gone through a split in their denomination and over this issue of whether to be fully affirming or not. So it's shaking out that those staying in the UMC are more likely to be affirming, and it's information you can probably find out pretty quickly and easily whether that specific church is for sure or not. But this might be a much more comfortable place for you if you're looking for something a little bit more reminiscent and a little bit more that uses the scriptures a bit more than some of these other denominations. But you can also sometimes find non-denominational churches that are fully affirming. A lot of times, like, check out new church plants. Sometimes they're affirming. I have known some new church plants that are affirming to actually be low key about it at first, which I think is a huge mistake. But some of them have done it that way because they're just kind of afraid of losing people. But if there's a new church plant and it's younger, it might be worth reaching out to them and asking them some of these questions. And also, there are some Baptist denominations that actually are affirming. If you're looking for a Baptist, like sometimes American Baptists are affirming, but I don't believe that's an always thing. So if you're Baptist and you want a Baptist church, you might actually be able to find an affirming Baptist church. They're out there. So because they have a more congregationalist model, it's a little bit more easy for them. I've known a few Southern Baptist churches that have transitioned to being affirming. So you might be able to find that as well. In the description, I'm going to put some important resources for this. There is a website, gaychurch.org, that is fantastic, that lists affirming churches. It's a really great place to start. Church Clarity is another good place. They kind of do some of the legwork for you on some churches. They haven't cataloged all of them, but they research the websites. They try to find out exactly what churches' positions are, so that could be a good place to go. And another thing that you don't want to look over is like LGBT groups in your area, whether it's a meetup group or a Facebook group or whatever, just to throw it out there and say, hey, what are some good churches that are totally affirming? I'm in the city I'm in, and this question comes up from time to time. One of the huge mega churches here just had a really awful, hateful sermon, and there was a huge discussion in the LGBT group, and people were like, I'm sick of this place. I need a better church. And everyone was talking about what churches they went to and giving suggestions and stuff like that. So that could be a really good option for you as well, just to reach out and see what other people's experiences have been. But whatever you're looking for and whatever path you take, some areas of the country are very hard to find affirming churches. Another thing that can make it really difficult is if you want a church that comes from more of your cultural background that's non-white. So if you're looking for a church that's more Latinx, or a church that is more of a Black church culture, that could be much more difficult. I would really recommend Trinity UCC Church in Chicago. I mean, if you're in Chicago, go there, or if you're not, even checking it out online is like an Afrocentric church that is just like beautiful and wonderful and amazing. So yeah, those churches are definitely out there. I hope that you have one in your area. I would just really encourage you to approach this with an open mind and recognize just how meaningful and powerful it is to worship in a way where you are 100% accepted. And if you can't find it at a church, maybe you could go to some conferences. So there are conferences that are very either queer-led or just very much open and affirming to queer people. So I think this is important, and I hope this has been helpful for you to figure it out. Check on my channel. We talk about these issues as well as theological issues and just all things LGBTQ and the church. And I hope you have a great day. Love ya. Bye.